Hello and welcome into episode 11 of Running for Coverage. I'm Cole Pepper. For those of you who have been following along week by week or episode by episode, you'll notice a little bit of a change in the format this week, and that is that we are going to shift some of the portions of the podcast that we're talking about results and looking ahead to the next week's races to the newsletter only. And the reason I'm doing that is because a lot of the people who have listened to the podcast who have given me some feedback, and I really appreciate the feedback from everybody who listens, they're telling me that they try to listen to it when they can. Sometimes they get it each time it comes out. Sometimes they'll listen to 2 or 3 over the course of a week just to get caught up. And by the time they do that, well, you have a lot of that information that is sort of outdated. So we'll continue on the newsletter to update the local races and look ahead. And if you're not a subscriber to the newsletter already, please do so. You can do that. Find me on Twitter at Cole Pepper, and there's a link on my the top pinned tweet or X, whatever post you call it now. You can also find me on just send an email, and I'll get you signed up for that newsletter. It is free, comes out every week. There are some prizes and discounts available on that as well. And you can email at runningforcoverage@gmail.com. That's FOR4. And we'll continue to update so everybody knows who's having a good run of races, who's performing well, and some of those kind of things that are more week to week. But we're going to spend more of our time in the podcast focusing on the interviews and the training tips and recovery and nutrition tips we're getting as well. We'll get one from Kelsey Pontius coming up here in just a bit. So all those things going on now with regard to what we have on the podcast. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest this week. And I didn't have to go far to find him. Well, we continue on here on Running for Coverage, and sometimes I have to go to great lengths to find a guest or to connect with a guest. Sometimes they are traveling, sometimes they're everywhere. I didn't have to go very far for this one. As it turns out, one of the better runners in our area lives right across the street from me and has since I moved to the house I live in now, and happy to be able to reach across the street and and bring in our guest for this week, Matt Monroe. And Matt has 5 Boston marathons.
That's right. Yeah.
And
5th one this year.
host of other great ones. Well, let me just start with this. You are, in addition to being an excellent runner, also a French horn player in the Jacksonville Symphony. You also travel quite a bit and play elsewhere. When you're traveling, whether it's Orlando or Portland or wherever you might be, Chicago, are you able to get runs in while you're being
Yeah.
a traveling troubadour?
Yeah. It's one of the best things about it. It's so easy to take with us. Uh, Always wherever I'm going, I'm making sure there's a pair of shoes and a pair of shorts and, you know, Garmin.
I want to meld together your, um, I I think this is accurate to say 2 passions, music
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
running. So walk me through this. You're packing up the French horn. You're packing up whatever else you have to, normal clothes, quote unquote. But if you're going to be away for 4 or 5 days somewhere as a guest French horn, what does that sort of itinerary look like for you?
Um, well, if it's flying, like I play with the Oregon Ballet Theater Orchestra, usually twice a year. And so if I'm flying back there, uh, it usually means that my carry-on is my horn and or my personal item is my horn. And I usually have to try to convince somebody on a plane, that it's fine and no, it will fit under the seat in front of me and do that whole song and dance. But I've been doing it for decades, so it's easy. Um, and yeah, planning ahead when I'm out there, there's a fantastic trail that I love running on, the Wildwood Trail up on the west side of Portland. 10-minute drive from where my mom lives, and it's like long run paradise as long as you want to go, pretty much.
And if you're somewhere else, so you that's sort of the other one of the two places you are most of your time, Jacksonville and Portland. What if you're in Orlando, or what if you're in another city that you're not as familiar with? Maybe that. How do you work running into it?
Well, one option in Orlando when I'm down there, I've got an old friend from Chicago, friends from Chicago, uh, who I met through running, and they have busy lives, but we all fit our runs in. So frequently go with him or his friends around the neighborhoods, around lots of cool little lakes and interesting cobblestone neighborhoods and whatnot to run in Orlando. Um, but if I'm somewhere I don't know, I use the back thing. The great thing about running is the scenery goes by slow enough that you can see it on your way out and usually remember it on your way back.
Usually, I will share a story here of a few years ago. I was in Minneapolis. The Jaguars were having a preseason practice sessions where they practiced a couple of days with the Vikings, then played a preseason game. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go out and I'll find a lake to run around. It's the land of 10,000 lakes. That'll be great. I went out and ran around the lake, and I was about 3.5 miles in. I turned around, circled the lake, came back, and must have taken a wrong turn on one of the footpaths, because the next thing you know, I wind up and I have no idea where I am. And I had not run with my phone. I
Of
don't
course.
usually run with the phone, right? So I just went out,
Right.
then all of a sudden where am I? I wound up getting 6.5 miles in that day. That wasn't really the plan, but that's what happened. I don't know if you ever had an experience like that where you go out in a city that you aren't used to running in, and suddenly you realize, I need some help here.
Yeah, I stick strict to the out and back for that reason. If it's not familiar, although I gotta say the Garmin's now have, if you have it in the right mode, there's a little map. Mine, it's a few years old, so it's kind of a crude map, but you can see if you're coming back the way you came, and see where that start point is and kind of head that direction.
Yeah, that's a real.
Helpful
I did
feature.
not. That was. I was. This was probably 2 Garmins ago, so I
Yeah,
didn't have that
right.
option. Got to see a lot of Minneapolis on that trip. Um, we mentioned the Boston marathons. Is in terms of the way you go about things, looking at your year to qualify for Boston, do you usually have a pretty good idea of when you'll get a time that'll get you in? And is it usually the same kind of same race, or the same couple of races, same time of year that you usually get your BQ?
It's been a whole bunch of different things. Let's see. One of my early ones was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which at the time I was living in Chicago. Kenosha's um, it's about an hour and a half, I think, from Chicago north, along Lake Michigan, and um, I think I just barely got it that year. It was a few age groups ago, so it had to be a little quicker.
Yeah.
Um, got one there. Um, I had a really interesting one in Portland, Oregon. So Portland, a long history of a great marathon there, but a couple years ago, some problems with money and whatnot, and they kind of disbanded it. But uh, a race director was found to kind of do a substitute, and um, somebody that I'd run with when I used to live in Portland, and I kind of hit her up, and she was like, "I'll get you an entry." So it's like, well, I guess I'm doing a marathon while I'm back, and I was back, playing the ballet. It was an October time thing, so I was excited. Kind of last minute, but luckily I was in shape, and um, about mile 22, we're crossing railroad tracks, and you wouldn't believe it, but turn the corner and there's a train, and it's
Oh,
slowing down, and there's a crowd of runners just hanging out, and I'm just Can't believe it. Train comes to a stop, and I'm like, this probably isn't smart, but I'm doing it. And jumped over the coupling. I think there was a volunteer that was mildly traumatized and afraid that I was going to get myself run over by a train, but jumped over, and there's nobody on the other side of the train, and just take off. There's one other guy. I don't know why, but he's wearing an Ultimate Fighting mask and carrying a flag, and he had been the whole race. So it was a trip. Me and this Ultimate Fighter duking it out at the end of the Portland Marathon. I get a time. It's not a great time. It's, a buffer of 5-ish minutes or something. And that year, that wasn't enough. So disappointment. And of course, I blame the train for that. Uh, but then that was the COVID year. And so they allowed people to use older times. So that time did not get me into the race. And then fast forward, it did get me into the race
As it turns out.
ultimately, which was pretty cool.
Do you remember when you first opened up that notice? I imagine it was email, maybe it was a letter that said you're in Boston for the first time.
Actually, that moment escapes me now. It's 2003. I ran my first marathon, Los Angeles, and um, it wasn't super competitive then like it is now. I mean, the times were tough, but you didn't have to make the time by, you know, 5 to 10 minutes extra to get in. And I think I had maybe 4 minutes buffer, and um, I kind of knew right
You're pretty
away.
confident at that point.
I was excited. Yeah. Um, it was one of the kind of hot-ish years, so it ended up not being a great race, and so I didn't requalify at Boston. And then whatever life happened, and I ended up not going back for another 10 years, I think it was.
Well, I didn't realize you had such a gap between the first and second Boston's. So when the second
Yeah.
time you went back, did you have was your perspective different than it had been because it had been so long and you had been there before, but there was this big gap?
Yeah, I mean it was amazing to be back. It was exciting. And I was there both times. I was there with a group. Second time, um my parents came, and my kids were there, and they were little. They don't really remember it. Um but it's still really cool to look back at those pictures and see the whole crew there. So it was a special year. But they all are, you know. Um that was get the years right here. That was uh sorry. I think that was 2013,
Okay.
2014, right? I think the bombing year was it 2013?
Or not-
Sorry.
I don't remember the exact year of it. It feels like it was 13 because I think they do the 10-year anniversary
Yeah.
of that this year, the memorial.
Yes, right. So I was there in 14 and 15. Um, being there the year I got to be there the year after the bombing, and that was also a really special one. It was definitely um, a vibe of helping Boston recover, and it was really special. And kind of the same thing as last year with the 10 year.
And so many people from Jacksonville up there this past year. It
Yeah,
must have been such
yeah,
a remarkable environment.
it was really fun.
Let me ask you about the Gate River Run. Obviously, the biggest race in Jacksonville. What's been your experience with the Gate, and uh, how much how much do you work your calendar around that, if at all, from a training standpoint, or just you know making sure you're in town for that?
I always want to do it, but it seems like for whatever reason it's one of those races that for me ends up like landing on the day of a gig or something. So I've done it several times, but I have some misses over the years too. But it's fantastic. I mean, it's huge. It's, brings elites from all over the world and big prize money, and it's amazing to see what the times look like for that race, in every age group, um, compared to most around. And I think we have a pretty competitive community here, but it's fast.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
When you get the elites in there, it adds everything, a little more to it. And
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot here, but leaving Gate aside, what are the other races that you really look forward to that you really enjoy here locally?
I have a quirky race that I really love. It's small. It's it's in our neighborhood, Riverside, the Mount Acosta Classic. It goes laps on the Acosta Bridge. The joke being that it's the only hill we have to train on, so we call it a mountain. Um, it's about a 2 mile loop. Uh, they close the road for it. It goes up one side, um, off the ramp, kind of around by Mosh, and then back up the other side. And they do it not in distance, but in time. So they had a I think originally it was a 1 hour race or a 3 hour race, and they have a bike race as well. So it's cool. It kind of brings two communities together. Um, for a few years in there, they got rid of the 3 hour race, I think trying to attract more people to it. And then this last year they brought back the long one. So that was kind of fun. But it usually falls February, March, and it's like the perfect kind of Boston preparation for me. So I like to use it for that, but it's also just like something different, that
Yeah.
you don't see.
Yeah, that the time element and the elevation element are two big
Yeah.
parts of that really go a long way to making a difference in what happens there. Um, I also want you mentioned your kids and you're being in Austin. I see you around the neighborhood sometimes running, uh,
Yeah.
dragging at least one of them along. What is the idea to be able to get out there and have that kind of father son time out on the
It's a
roads?
it's a lot of fun. I have to kind of choose my moments and remember that they are, 9 and 12, and what was my running like at 9 and 12? It really wasn't much. So I try to leave it up to them as much as I can and not push it if they don't want to go, but it's such a blast having them out. My youngest has gotten the age to do a couple 5Ks, and that's really fun to get him out there. And kids, they get faster as they grow, right? They don't even have to do anything. They just do what they do and they get faster. So that's a blast, and
Yeah,
tracking his times, watching him improve.
it's almost guaranteed PRs until you get to be about 13 or 14 years old,
Yeah.
maybe 15. Just because of the natural growth, and you get taller and longer
Yeah.
strides and the muscle development and everything else. Did you run growing up at that age? Were you running? Was it something that was part of you, or did you come to it a little bit later?
I did a bit. My grandfather on my father's side uh, was an outdoor enthusiast and just a really active guy. He was always out in the woods, always hiking. Had climbed Mount Hood. I should find out the number, but it's kind of in the ridiculous category. Like he would take groups, guided groups up Mount Hood, and and he ran marathons. Um, and my my uncle as well was a runner most of his life. So when my grandfather passed away, a race was started, the Monroe Memorial 10K, and it was held at a small local college in Portland where he had taught philosophy. And so, I don't know, 10, ish. And I think my mom, she kind of helped me train. We got out of the neighborhood and, you know, did the work to get ready, and 6.2 miles seemed like a marathon at that point. Um, so it wasn't really like a regular thing. It was just like, whoa, the Monroe Memorial 10K is coming up, we should, oh no, here we go again. So I think I ran it probably 3 or 4 times when I was a kid. And
Is it still
so,
being
yeah,
held?
no, sadly. Um, I think there were some attempts to get it back, but it's not really anymore. I
That's a neat.
probably need to take up the baton and get back to Portland and talk to some people.
Well, if you do, I'll run that. You do it in the summertime. We'll go out there and run it with you,
All right, sounds
for
good.
sure. We love to go out to the Northwest in the
Yeah,
summertime. I didn't realize that you said your grandfather was a philosophy professor.
yeah.
But I didn't realize that. But I think some of that has gone down through the bloodlines. In preparation, kind of mentally thinking about what I wanted to talk about with you for this podcast. One of the things that I was thinking was how to describe, you know, you as a runner, and there through our conversation, you have a very kind of pensive approach to running questions. Anytime I ask a question, if we're just standing out in the street talking or whatever, I can see the wheels turning when I ask a question about running, and I always like your answers because you're processing a lot of that stuff. So I wanted to do a little bit of that, if I could. I'm going to throw some running questions at you, sort of lightning round stuff. And I want to get your reaction. Some of these you have probably thought about hundreds of times, some maybe you never have. Let's start with what's the right way to warm up on race day?
Hmm. Well, there's the right way, and then there's what usually happens for me. Um, Ideally, get there. It depends on the race a little bit, but the most common occurrence is the 5K. So get there. I think ideal for me is 45 minutes before, so I don't give up too much sleep, but I have time to jog easy and get everything fully warm before it all goes down.
Just a jog.
Um,
That's sort of your go-to.
yeah, yeah, pretty much just a jog. I I like doing karaoke's, or the alternating legs sideways,
Hmm.
um, kind of stretch things up, wake things up, get the core moving. Um, I'll do those and just a jog mostly.
Do you warm up differently for a morning race than you do for an evening race?
Yeah. Well, if life allows that, a little morning run would be nice uh on those days. Usually evening races just totally mess with my head because, I we're used to running on an empty stomach, and obviously like going all day without food isn't really feasible. And so yeah, the evening races, if I can just get myself there, I'm doing good.
All right, you mentioned running on an empty stomach. So you wake up, is there on race day for a morning race, coffee, water, Gatorade, any like a donut? Is there anything that you put in before you get going?
Um, I always get a good drink of water straight out of bed. I avoid Gatorade like the plague. Um, that that much sugar doesn't feel good in my stomach. And if I do want something like that, it's usually like on a longer race, and it's probably a gel of some sort. Um, I like coffee a lot. I usually don't drink it before races, but an exception might be marathons, and I would usually drink it kind of close to, if I'm going to do that, I would drink it close to the start so that I'm getting it during a lot of that during the race. For Boston, I took the gels that they had on the course that had caffeine. That was how I did the caffeine. But post race or post run coffee is like the best thing in the world. So I usually do my coffee after.
I'm usually going for something else after the race, but it's usually not coffee. Something else to quench the thirst.
That's a good reason for the evening race.
Yeah, right. True or false? You training in the heat in Florida is a benefit.
It's absolutely a benefit. It's it's torturesome. It's brutal. Uh, it's cool you asked me that question because that's been one of the things this year that I've been conscious of is really trying to keep it going at the absolute worst time of the year. Um, I compare it to training at altitude. Honestly, I think it's a similar effect where you cannot get as much oxygen as you want out of the air. Um, I think it's a real benefit,
How are you
but
for heat? How
you
are
got to do
you?
it, and usually at this time of year, I'm like, oh man. So sticking with it is the hard thing.
And as you know, I'm trying to train for a half marathon in this stuff, and it's that I've not run a half before, so this is it's been trying. And I know I'm not great. I don't dissipate heat real well as a bigger guy. Are you? Where do you put yourself on the scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the best in terms of running in the heat.
I don't think I'm great. I don't know. I've known I've known a few people that are really good in the heat, but I don't think most people are. I would rather, um, I lived in Chicago for 11 years, so I got used to running in the cold, and that's uncomfortable too. But um, you're moving like, and our bodies most of the time they're trying to cool themselves down because of the activity, and so running in the extreme cold, it's taken care of for you.
So if I gave you
So
the option,
I would always rather have it too cold.
I was going to say, if I gave you the option of running in the heat, in the wind, in the rain, or the cold, it's an easy choice for you.
Yeah, I would take the cold. Hate running in the rain. I grew up in Oregon. Um, so you always had to run in the rain there. And best possible scenario was that you didn't have to go out the door while it was raining, that it would start while you were after you were out already. That was a better option. But yeah, I don't prefer running in the rain. Running in the snow is cool. Running in the snow is a lot of fun. As long as it's
Yeah,
not slippery.
yeah. I did one. The first 5K I ever ran was not one I was intending to run, but I was in Kansas City visiting family. My dad had signed up for it. It was a Valentine's Day run, and there was about 3 feet of snow on the ground in Kansas City, and some of the sidewalk had been shoveled where the path was, and it was just a
Yeah.
big square basically around a big junior college there. And I also realized at the time that I had way overdressed for it because I hadn't run a 5K before. This was years ago. And I bundled up like I thought I needed to be taking stuff off. You know, point being, you learn a lot of lessons running in bad conditions that if you've not run in them before, you won't forget them very easily
Yeah.
because your body will tell you all about that. I do want to take a little bit of time here. We talk about the thing that you won't run without on this podcast, the thing you're a raving fan of. You showed your Garmin a little bit earlier. Is that the thing that you won't run without?
That's probably the thing. I've heard of people running without their watches. I've never done it. I'm kind of a nerd about the numbers, and I love Strava. I don't. I'm not a huge fan of social media for the most part, but I kind of love Strava. That's my go-to. Um, Yeah, I think that's the thing.
If
I
it
like to
if
run light,
yeah.
like you, never run with the phone. I've done it, with an armband before, but I like to just be free, just me and the run.
The one big benefit I find with running with a phone is on a long run. I love to listen to a podcast. Maybe somebody's listening to this podcast right now as they're doing a long run. I love to listen to the podcast, and I've got to figure out a way to do that. I know you can load some stuff on your watch as well sometimes and get out there and run, but that's usually only for if I'm going 5 miles or more, and
Yeah.
you get that one of those long form podcasts. Um, you probably are at the stage of life now where you have received as much running advice as you will have, probably decreasing in terms of the amount of running advice people are just handing out to you. And you are now giving out more running advice to people based on your age and your accomplishments and so forth. What kind of things do you think people um, can learn that they maybe wouldn't know from experience if they haven't run 5 Boston marathons or run um, the Monroe Memorial or some of these races? What kinds of things, uh, kind of advice do you like to give to runners?
Oh, the big one I think is the age old don't go out too fast. Where I think we're all in one way or another still trying to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of my one of my proudest Boston's my not my fastest, close, but one of my proudest was one where I looked at my splits later, 5K splits, and they were like just ticking down. The average was like 1 second faster through the race. I was like, that's amazing. Like, I was supposed to go out too fast in the first 5 miles, and somehow I resisted that. But that's the only one that I can think of, you know. Most of the time it's really hard to restrain ourselves. So I think that's the big one is uh, save it. Do it at the end.
Easier
We're
said
more
than
efficient.
done. Yeah,
What's that?
easier said than done, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah, big time.
you can tell yourself at the start line, don't go out too fast, don't go out too fast. You can if you stand now you're standing at the front of the start line on most of these races. You're up front. I'm back where there are, you know, the pace flags, and I've realized number one, nobody is actually standing where they should be, where those pace flags are. People
Right.
who think they're running 10-minute mile pace are going to run 14-minute mile pace, but they're going to be up there. And for the first quarter mile, they're running an 8-minute mile pace. So it's you got to rid yourself of that preconception. And this is something I'm struggling with, and maybe you can give me some advice on this, is how to train your body to embrace that race pace and know what it feels like so that you can kind of self-adjust and diagnose in the first quarter mile, half a mile of a race, so you can settle into that pace without having to constantly be looking down at the watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it used to be a lot harder. I mean, this is a huge cheat. Being able to look down and see, oh, yeah, I can't keep that up for the next 3 miles. Okay, chill out. That helps a lot. Um, yeah, I don't know.
I was hoping for some wisdom. I was hoping to get the
Um,
magic potion there.
you know, I read a book recently. Suffer Better is the title. Um, Jackson Yee. He actually lives in Jacksonville, and I a work colleague, and it's really interesting. The basic premises, and there's some examples of different athletes in there, some running, but the premise is that your your brain talks you out of it. Your brain is what determines um, what you can do, and whether or not the suffering you're feeling is something that you need to respond to or not. And usually the signal to like chill out or stop or whatever is premature in terms of what we can actually accomplish and what we really want to accomplish. So I haven't cracked the code, but um, I think it's about accepting that pain basically in mid race and being able to convince yourself that it's temporary and you can keep going through it.
And that's
One of the
called
great things about running, really.
Suffer
Where
Better,
else?
you
What
said
else?
is the title.
Sorry. Yeah,
Suffer
suffer
Better.
better.
All right. Well, I will pick that one up next time. It is a great analog for life. There's no doubt about it. When you go
Yeah,
through, tough times, as everybody basically does at some point or another in their life, to realize how resilient you are as a person, and that the old line, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And we're
yeah,
we're still here, so this is as strong as we have ever been, and we'll get even stronger as we go on. Well, I could talk to you for quite a
yeah.
long time, and have off camera, but I appreciate you jumping on with us this week. Some good stuff from Matt Monroe, and I'll see you in the neighborhood.
Thanks, Cole. Good to see you.
As you can tell, a very thoughtful person and runner, Matt Monroe there. Great to be able to talk with Matt. Again, as I mentioned, he lives across the street. We talk quite a bit when he's in town. Um, as I mentioned as well, we are going to continue to have the gear reviews. You heard Matt's gear review there in the interview. And we'll also have our nutrition, training, and recovery tip. And this week it's Kelsey Pontius, who is a certified dietitian, registered dietitian, a sports dietitian. And also, as you may know, if you've listened to the podcast, she has qualified for her second Olympic marathon trials coming up next year. So uh, as many of us start to look at longer races as the weather starts to break and it's not quite as hot, one of the big things is making sure your nutrition is in line. So here's what you should be thinking about when you start getting into longer training runs and longer races as the weather starts to break.
I would start at this point. I would like to get familiar with what's available on their specific race course. So if you look and our Jacksonville, Thanksgiving half marathon has water available for you every 2 miles, and then maybe they're handing out gels along the way, and you know that you want to take the gel that they're offering, then I would start to practice that kind of hydration and that specific whatever they have on course. So for example, like Chicago Marathon, they have Gatorade endurance gels on course, and then they have water stops. I'm not super familiar, but every 2 miles to 5K. And so that might be something that you replicate in your training. So that's kind of where, as far as like, what to have in your training, that's a good start. Now, how often to practice it and what your needs are. So anything over 75 minutes, I start encouraging people to use things like calories via carbohydrates. So for a race efforts, that's going to take someone anywhere between 75 and 2.5 hours. The recommendation is anywhere between 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. So to translate that to calorie needs, there's 4 calories and 1 gram of carbs. So that's roughly 250 to 350 or 240 to 360 calories per hour that you're needing. Now, once your race duration is over 2.5 hours, so for a lot of people, this might be still half marathon, but this might also now get them into more marathon distances. The recommendation is anywhere between 60 grams to 90 grams per hour. So now we're at that 360 plus, calories per hour. And so depending on, how you want to look at it, whether it's grams of carbohydrates, I would say calories from carbohydrates. Those are the types of calories. Those are our most readily available sources of energy. It's the only fuel our brain can use. It's what's stored in our glycogen. And then once we kind of cross the threshold of 90 minutes, we start needing exogenous, meaning outside calories. So if we carb load really well, we can kind of get through 90 minutes okay without using calories during. But I normally like to start people earlier than that. And then that's why people like bonk at mile 20 if they're not fueling correctly, because we're running out of those internal storages if we've carb loaded appropriately and we start needing outside things. And so you want it to kind of be as even as possible. Start practicing your fueling strategy, thinking about how long am I going to be on the course? And then realizing too, sorry, this is a lot of information, but different fuel types like carbohydrates, people are going to tolerate different kinds better than others. So starting early in your training so you can trial and error what agrees with your body the best.
All right, great stuff from Kelsey there. Thanks so much to Kelsey, also to Matt Monroe, and to you for listening and watching the podcast. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon as well. And that's a great way to know that you'll get that podcast popping in as soon as we post a new one. And as well, as I mentioned earlier, please do sign up for the newsletter. That's a great way to stay in touch with our running community. Thank you so much for listening to Running for Coverage. We'll talk to you next time.